Well, welcome back. We're going to talk about something now that is very, very powerful and can make you a lot of money if you get it. I want to talk about the power of presence. And what I want to do in this session is to help you understand a very simple principle, but it's the reason why a guest might leave you 10% or 30% for doing essentially the same thing. And once you understand that, you'll know what you can do about it. I love this little cartoon. Maybe you've seen this before. It's your first day as a waitress, but there's no need to be shy. There's your first customer. Go right up and communicate. Tip or die. Well, hey, it might work. You never know. Y'all want to make more money? I mean, can I assume that your income is primarily tips? And if your income is primarily tips, how about a 50% raise? 50% more money? Anybody interested in that? Well, there's a couple of ways that you can do that. And one possibility, when people talk about making more money, is you could increase your sales by 50%. And usually when people talk about this, they talk about building the average check. And I have no problem with that, except I think it's a little bit dangerous because you can get the sale and lose the guest. We'll talk a little bit later in this series about ways to build sales without having to push the check. But for the moment, I want to look at this from a little different direction. Because what are the odds that you could increase your average check by 50% and still have people coming back as often as they're coming back now? Slim to maybe none? It's dangerous. Here's another possibility. What if you had somebody that was coming in, let's say, twice a month? What are the odds that you could treat them in such a way that they'd come back 3 times a month? Could you do that? Because if they're coming in twice and you get them 3 times, that's a 50% increase too. No pressure on you to sell, no pressure on them to buy. Just have a marvelous time. Please come back soon. They're going somewhere. They're going someplace. So one possibility is that I could get more money just by having my regular guests come back more often. And the other possibility is that since your income is primarily tips, if you could make more money on the same volume, in other words, if you averaged 18% instead of 12%, well, that'd be a 50% increase too, wouldn't it? Now, if you could do both of these things, that would be interesting. Did you ever get less of a tip off a table than you expected? Did you ever get more? Ever wonder why? Would it be helpful to know why? Because I remember back in my waiter days, I got a $20 tip on a $24 check one day, and I said, I like this. But I didn't know what I did. I didn't know why it happened. And because I didn't know why it happened, I thought it was just kind of the luck of the draw, and sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. But I've come to understand that there's a lot more to it than that. So a little quiz. Nothing big, but just tell me, would you like to enjoy your job more? How about if you were fascinating to others? Well, no, you're already fascinating. Never mind. How about the weeds? You all familiar with the weeds? If you could do everything that you need to do and stay out of the weeds, would that be at all helpful? Do you ever notice when you get in the weeds that your tips suffer? We'll talk about why that is in a second. How about stress? Anybody feel stress is sort of a normal part of being out there on the planet? If we could vastly reduce your level of stress, would that make your life any easier? What if you were an expert with people? What if every time you had to deal with another human being, you instinctively knew what to do and it worked? And I'm talking about your guests and your boss and your parents and your kids and your significant other and the guy at the dry cleaner. Anytime you had to deal with another human being, you did it well. Improve your performance, raise your energy level, increase your tips. Would that be good? I mean, if this isn't interesting, we just end the tape here and we'll pick it up later. But all of this looks kind of grand, but the key to it is very simple, and it's something that we call presence. Presence, very simply, is just a state of mind that's free from distraction. Here's another way to think about that. Have you ever been talking to someone who was listening to you and then suddenly they weren't listening to you? Ladies, you understand what I mean? I mean, guys, we're bad. It's true. It's terrible. Can you tell pretty much the instant they check out? Or you're talking to somebody on the phone. Can you tell when they've got other things going on? Right? And you can't even see them, and you know. And when you're talking to someone who is not listening to you, how does that make you feel? I mean, irritated at best. Absolutely infuriating at worst. Distracted state of mind creates irritation in other people. It is incredibly annoying to be talking to someone who is not listening to you, and we do it all the time. Because we bought this idea that the way you get a lot of things done is you do a lot of things at once. But the truth of it is, when you are not listening, people know that you're not listening. And because when I'm talking to you, think about this. When I'm talking to you, there's no place that I can be and nothing else that I can be doing except be talking to you. I mean, you're at a table with a guest. What can you do that instant about food that's up in the kitchen? Or getting your transmission fixed? Or getting a date for the week? Well, no, that could depend on the table. But at any rate, if I'm talking to you, there's no place else that I can be. And if I'm thinking about something else, you know it, right? You don't necessarily know what I'm thinking about, but you know that I'm not all with you. And the message I deliver at that point is that I've got something going on for me right now that's more important than you are. And I will suggest to you that that's annoying, and in a business that is based upon the voluntary return of our guests and their voluntary contributions to your financial well-being, irritating them is not a great business move. See, if you look at where the tip comes from, some people are going to tip you because it's the custom in this country to do that. Some people will leave you a tip because they feel guilty if they don't. But for the most part, there's that moment of truth at the end of the meal when people are poised over the credit card slip, or they have the cash in their hands and they say, what are we going to do? They say, no, man, she was great. Bang. It's all about personal connection. I mean, at the least, they're going to round up a buck instead of rounding down a buck. And on a lot of checks, up a buck, down a buck can be 50%, isn't it? So it's all about personal connection. And presence increases the personal connection between people. Presence, in fact, is the personal connection between people. If I am distracted, we will never connect. And if we do not connect, you are going to have less of a good time, and it's going to cost me money in tips. And you can say, well, sounds good, but what's the big deal? I remember doing a program for a resort area outside Seattle, and I'd gone there the night before and went down to dinner, and nobody knew who I was. And the waiter was not having a good time. He was seriously in the weeds. His timing was off. He wasn't having any fun. His tables weren't having any fun. It was one of those meals that was just painful to be part of. Have you ever had one of those when you just say, please, just let us all get out of this alive and I'll be happy? Well, he came into the seminar the next day, recognized me, and he said, oh, boy. I said, how'd it go last night, Jerry? He said, oh, man. He said, 10%, 12%. He said, just a terrible night. And we talked about this idea of presence, among other things. And I saw him that night. He is cruising. Big grin on his face. I look out there. His tables are all smiles. I caught him over by the register. I said, how's it going? He said, I just got a $27 tip off a $75 check. He said, I've been averaging 25, 30% all night. And I said, what are you doing differently, Jerry? He said, I'm just trying to be at the table when I'm at the table. Because distractions will kill you. I was talking to a group in New Jersey, and one of the distractions, this one is interesting, one of the distractions that's very common is thinking about the tip. If you go to the table thinking about what kind of a tip you're going to get off that table, it's a distraction that gets in the way of creating the connection that creates the tip in the first place. And so we had talked about that in the morning, and after lunch, one of the waitresses came up to me and she said, look, I got to tell you, when you told us that this morning, I thought that was the biggest load of crap I had ever heard. And because what I had said was, you know, if you just scooped the money off the table and didn't pay any attention to it at the end of the night, you'd feel pretty good, usually. And she said, I knew you were nuts, and so I thought, well, I tell you what, it's going to be a slow lunch, and I'm just going to prove this jerk wrong. And she said, for the whole meal, all I did, I didn't even worry about the money. I just threw it in the drawer, didn't even count it, and just focused on being with my guests. And at the end of the meal, she said, I had a great time. It was a fun lunch. But it was a little slow, and I added up sales, and it's like $140, and I figured, well, maybe 25, $30 in there. She said, I opened the drawer, there was $65 in there. And I couldn't believe it. She said, I had a ball. And that's the point. Presence is the personal connection between people. And I don't want to make this into anything that's really bizarre. Presence is a very natural state. This is where we're all born. Little babies have amazing presence. I mean, think what happens when you bring a newborn baby into the room. Baby immediately becomes the focus of attention, doesn't it? And you feel better, right? And everybody's saying, oh, the baby, look at this, right? Kid's not doing anything. Kid's just hanging. But babies aren't distracted. They haven't learned how to think yet, so they're just totally in the moment. And we call it the helium principle, but what the helium principle suggests is that if you maintain a positive state of mind, other people will naturally rise to that. You just feel better around folks when the lights are on in somebody's home. So on those nights when you're focused and you're right there at the table with people, they feel better. When they feel better, they order more. When they feel better, they tip more. When they feel better, they tell their friends and they come back more often. And when you're in the weeds, no connection, you work your buns off, and the tips are in the tank. So what this suggests is that your state of mind influences your guest's experience of the meal. And it also influences your tip. So just think about that. Now, this is not to say that we're never going to get distracted, because that happens. But the trick to staying on track is just recognize that you're getting lost. If you suddenly become aware of the fact that you're getting distracted, it'll automatically start you self-correcting again. Because you ever notice on those nights when you get in the weeds, it's like I never saw it coming? Just suddenly it's 5 hours later and I'm totally exhausted. On the other side of that, the flip side of that, have you ever had a night when you were working in magic? What I would call working in magic. And magic is when you're busy but you're not slammed and you're just in this nice little groove and you know that you're doing great work but you're not really focused on anything in particular, and suddenly when it's 2 in the morning you have all this energy and all this money. And what I'll suggest is when that happens, it's because we were so busy we just didn't have time for distracting thoughts. Like old folks don't tip and I wish I was someplace else, and all those things that are totally unrelated to being at the table and doing a great job with your guests tonight. It almost sounds too simple, but what I will guarantee you is you just start to focus on how well you're connecting with folks, and it will help you connect with folks a whole lot better. Presence can help you enjoy your job more because you're there with what you're doing. Time disappears. You do great work. You're fascinating to other people because nobody pays attention to each other like we ought to. And the fact that you listen well is going to blow people away. When you get distracted is when you get in the weeds. So being in the moment will keep you focused. Your stress goes down because you really only have to deal with one thing at a time, and it all seems simple. Athletes call it being in the zone, but it's exactly the same thing. You do become an expert with people. I mean, when you connect with somebody, you pretty much know, don't you? If they want you to talk, if they want you to go away, what they need. We talk a lot about reading the table, but all reading the table is just quieting your mind and letting yourself connect with folks. Your performance improves, your energy level goes up, and best of all, your tips increase in the process. This is such a simple idea, and it makes all the difference in the world. So the key things to understand about presence is that personal connection is really the key to hospitality. And that's what I mean by the key to hospitality is people having that feeling of being in a place of hospitality, that feeling that we really are glad to see them, that we do want them to have a good time. There's a difference between making people feel well served and just going through the mechanics of the job. Presence will lead to increased personal connection, and increased personal connection leads to higher tips. And finally, it helps to understand that you can really only focus your attention on one thing at a time. All this talk about multitasking sounds kind of interesting, but the truth of it is, when I'm talking to you, there's no place else that I can be and nothing else that I can be doing except be talking to you. And if I'm talking to you and thinking about something else, that's a distraction, and we lose the connection. So it's really more about the quality of time, not the quantity of time. Your whole shift becomes a series of 5-second, 10-second transactions, because I can always cut you 5 seconds. And what it means is anytime you're at a table and you're talking, you're only talking to one person. Now, if there's 5 people at the table, I'm going to say a few things to you, and then I'll shift my attention and I'll talk to you and I'll talk to you. But I'm always talking to someone, not talking to my order pad, not talking to the table, not talking over my shoulder. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. What do we have to do here? Good, got it. Next thing. Got it. Next thing. And what happens then is that you stay focused. It means that the condiments are at the table before you bring the burger. It means that you anticipate what people need before it even occurs to them. And that's brilliant service.